Hello John Deere snowmobile fans. Today I have something a little different on the channel. Today I have a 1980 John Deere Sportfire 440. Normally on this channel I try to show you guys sleds that are totally done, gone through, great riders. Today I got a sled that's literally farm fresh, just pulled it out of the barn, haven't done anything with it, haven't even hardly looked at it. So today I'm giving you guys a good walk around of it and what I like to look for and just kind of run down. My favorite Deere sleds are the Fire series, so 79 Trail Fire and up till 1984. The reason being is it's the sleds I grew up with. They're the ones I know the best. There's nothing wrong with the other ones. I just stray away from them because my knowledge with those are pretty thin. So this sled, with what I would like to show is, first I'd like to do is just walk around, see if it was ever smashed. It looks to be really straight. The lines look nice. And kind of give you a walk down the bumper, because the bumper usually tells the tale if the sled has ever been hit, especially in the front. Because if the hood doesn't shut right, usually then this bulkhead up in here got bent, which it doesn't really affect the riding of the sled, but it does major affect how this hood goes back on. Looks like they did a little trade in paint with the fences. Not too terrible. A little crack in the headlight grill. Crack in the dash, which is actually astounding because the hood is not busted. So I'm guessing they were working on something and slipped or fell and folded the dash too far forward and broke it off in the bar, I'm guessing. 3,685 miles on the clock. And yes, the gauges do read miles, not kilometers. Had factory hand warmers. It's actually pretty astounding that this seat here is in one piece. Usually the top of the sports seat does have a little tear, but it ain't bad because normally the top of this thing is just totally chewed right off, gone. Just junk. But this one, it's brittle, but it's there. What's also shocking is when I picked this sled up, the gentleman still had the operator's manual. This is the first thing people throw away, so it's pretty neat to actually get one of these. Snow flap is in pretty nice shape. Now, a big difference between a 1980 and, let's say, an 83, I've not shown this sled on the channel before, but is the track. A 1980 carried a cleated track and a totally different skid, whereas a 1982, 3, 4 all had rubber tracks and a full skid like a liquefier. This one runs like an upper roller system, kind of like a Trail Fire. And as you can see, this thing even had factory star studs on it at one time. These squares tell me that. I've seen quite a few miles though. Move on this way. It looks like the stickers look to be in really good shape on both sides, so they'll clean up really nice. So let's see here. I always like to see if some miracle the gas cap's in decent shape. Oh, yee, absolutely not. That one's toast, junk. I see the sled also has the premium recoil handle here, the old barn board that was probably laying on the ground. I guess it isn't silly if it works. But all in all, it looks to be a really straight sled. Small rust holes in the skis, but not bad. Open the hood here and we'll take a look-see under here. So the common thing that seems to always be missing with any old snowmobile, be any brand, is people seem to always throw out the air box. And of course, this sled is right there with it. Does not have its original air box. It is missing for the PowerJet carburetor. But luckily, I do have a replacement that I can use that I took off a different sled years ago. And then a real odd thing about this sled is the chain case. The parts are completely MIA, missing in action. The owner said that he did not remember what he did with them. Doesn't know what he did with the cover. He claimed to me he could have threw them out at one point in time. But lucky for him, when I bought it from him, I have all those parts, so I can get this thing up and running in no time. as far as a chain case. Now, the first thing I like to do when I get one of these fire series is I like to do a good walk around and just kind of look at things to see what's wrong. And the first thing I notice is all this oil under the headlight. That tells me one of two things, or possibly three things, but usually it's either the Y pipe joint's leaking, or as in this motor, which I just noticed now, is all this is wet here, which would probably tell me that the exhaust manifold gasket is leaking. Maybe the heads, but probably exhaust manifold, judging by the mess on the front of the block. Now, if like my younger self, when I first would get these sleds, I'd take them home, I'd get all excited, I'd clean the tank, put a new fuel pump on it, put a new impulse line in the motor, I'd clean the carburetor, I'd fire it up, and I'd go ripping across the hayfield 3-4 times, and before you know it, I'd melt the mag cylinder down. So before I get all excited and do foolish things like I used to do, I now do things totally different. I like to pull the motors out, and I like to replace the crank seals. And I know guys like to harp on everybody about replacing the crank seals on a Kawasaki motor. And there's a reason for it. The mag seal, 9 times out of 10, is known to dry out, crack, go brittle, and break. And then unfortunately, the sled will maybe run good for the first 2-3 laps around the yard. Then the mag side gets melted down. I know there's a couple guys that are probably watching and saying, you can do the trick of spraying brake cleaner on the PTO crank seal to see if that one's bad. That works for the PTO side, but let's say it runs great and there's no change in RPM. Because if you spray the brake cleaner on the PTO seal and it's bad, the motor will jump RPM all over the place. But if it's holds steady, that usually means this seal's all right. But the unfortunate part is normally the PTO seal is all right in a Kawasaki. It's normally the mag side, which unfortunately is behind the stator, the flywheel. So you got to take all that apart just to see if it's okay. So if you're already that deep in it, you might as well split the lower case. So what I'm going to do with this one here is I'm going to pull this clutch off. I'm going to pull the motor out. I'm going to tear the bottom end apart. And if there's any problems, then I'll start doing the top. I usually don't like to split the jugs and the cylinder heads if they're not leaking. Because if the seal's not leaking, it's probably still good, and there's really no reason to waste a gasket kit on the upper half. But I will absolutely do the lower crank seals. I won't even think about riding it just plain. I like to Yama bond the case when I'm done and let the motor sit for 24 hours. And then I put it back in. And then this sled will probably be just a good all-around nice rider from around the yard. So that's basically the small walkthroughs I like to do on a Kawasaki Deer.